Joining us now to talk more about this is Rajeev Chandrasekhar, former President FICCI and a member of the Rajya Sabha. He has also successfully launched a telecom service in the 1990s and sold it for a profit. Welcome, Rajeev, and thank you for joining us. So we learned that two telcos want to return their license and want their money back. Should the government grab this with open arms, take the license and resell it now that we know there is a premium on spectrum in India?
No, I think, the answer to that can't be as simple as the one you propose. There is clearly the principle of a contractual obligation that the operators are under. I mean, they are obliged to roll out, they're obliged to invest when they bought that license, which we all know was a very cheap license. Now, if some of them have, in a sense, changed their minds, it can't be that it can't be the case of anybody that I just give back the license and I'll get the money back and all of us are just going to say goodbye and good luck. There is a contractual obligation. They were obliged to roll out. They're obliged to invest. And if for some reason they are in default of those obligations, the government must take action under that contract of that default. Having said that, I think if there is a default and the spectrum reverts back to the government, it is something of a bonanza for the government, because the 3G auctions have shown today that each of these 6.2 megahertz of spectrum can get the government 15,000, 16,000 crores. So if there are two operators, as you are saying, that could mean 25 to 30,000 crores for the government. So on one hand, it is not a bad idea for the government to recover that spectrum because it's clearly going to earn them more money. But at the same time, the principle that operators can't just walk away from their obligations have to be enforced.
But Rajeev, in the 1990s, we had a case where a lot of telcos overbid and then told the government, we can't run these services. And then the government said, well, let's have a share of revenue model. Could the government then say, well, or could the players argue, the circumstances have changed, the marketplace has changed dramatically from 2008 when we went into this. You've got to help us out because you've set a precedent previously by helping telcos out.
Yeah, but I don't think helping the sector out is the same as helping two telcos out. You have to be very clear about the point that these telcos are making. It can't be the case of any telecom company that you go in and make a case for a cheap license. The entire argument for a cheap license without tendering and without auctions was that you would increase competition. And now that you suddenly change your mind, you come back and say, excuse me, I have changed my mind and I want to give the license back. Can you give me my money back? It's like saying I start an IT company, I buy the computers from HP or IBM. 6 months down the road, I say, okay, my business model doesn't work. Can I give the computers back to IBM and expect them to refund the money? It just doesn't work that way. There is a contractual obligation, and as you know, the entire dysfunctionality in telecom in India has been, everybody spins the basic fundamental contract between government and operator in different ways. But there is no need to spin this. There is a contract, there is a license, the operators are obliged to invest and roll out, the government is obliged to enforce those obligations, and if there is a default under that contract, then there is the default provisions. The spectrum either reverts back to the government or the license gets cancelled. But if that does happen, I'm saying the government is not disadvantaged. Even if two operators decide to exit today or default today in their obligations, the spectrum to the government still represents a valuable asset. They can still introduce two new operators and they can make a lot more money than 3,000 crores.
Right. So should the government decide, okay, you're having a problem rolling out, we'll take the license and then auction it. Doesn't that again open a can of worms? Because it was accused of having given these 2G licenses away in 2008 without an auction and not at the fair market price. Doesn't that open a Pandora's box?
Anisha, the Pandora's box has been opened the day the 3G licenses were auctioned. The can of worms, to use your metaphor, is long since open, and it's visible to everybody that these licenses were given away at prices that were far below market prices. We know that, and that's a fact. If that is not the issue today, the issue is if two operators today are saying, we will use the threat of returning a license, and we all know what this threat is about. This threat is about trying to get a relaxation on the M&A norms that have been enforced, where these licenses cannot be merged, sold for 3 years. These operators want essentially without rollout, without any investment, to flip these licenses into a merger transaction. And that is an unacceptable situation. I mean, either the government takes the spectrum back, auctions it, gets the maximum resources that it can get, as was evidenced by the 3G auctions, or these operators should go ahead and invest and roll out the businesses.
Right, but during this time also a lot of, there is a haze in the entire regulatory system here. So don't you think some of their fears are a little justified? Shouldn't the government, perhaps like you mentioned, make it easier for these M&As to happen and set the stage for consolidation?
No, you see, Anisha, this is the point that has to be understood. These licenses were not given through an auction process. They were given at a very cheap price, where the fundamental argument made by the ministry and the Minister of Telecom was, we are doing this to increase competition. Now, if you're doing this to increase competition, you can obviously not reduce the number of players, you have to increase the number of players in the market. That is how public benefits, through affordability and lower prices. But having used the argument of increased competition to give cheap licenses, you can't 2 years later wake up and say, no, excuse me, I want mergers and acquisitions because I want the industry to consolidate because two of them are not viable. Now, one of the points that have been made here is wrong. I don't have a problem with mergers and acquisitions, and there is nothing wrong with mergers and acquisitions. But if you've used the argument of increasing competition to give away licenses cheaper, then that increased competition should be the public policy objective.
So, Rajeev, is a quicker fix to have a punitive fee, like a huge penalty, and say, well, give it back, but here's the penalty because you can't take the government and license obligations for granted?
Exactly right, and I've raised this in Parliament, Anjana. I have said this, and I have written to the Prime Minister as well on this, that if people want to walk away from telecom and their obligation, there is no problem. We should encourage people who are not finding telecom as their core competency, thought this was some gold rush, and walked into it 2008. If they want to walk away from the sector, there's absolutely no problem. We should facilitate that. We should roll out the red carpet and encourage them to do it. But they should pay a cost for it, and the converse should not be allowed, which is that they benefit and profit from getting a cheap license. That is a slap on the face of public policy and the slap on the face of the exchequer and the citizens of India. If they want to exit, let them exit, let them pay a punitive fee, maybe 50% of what they paid. The spectrum can be surrendered back to the government, and the government can auction the spectrum back to 2 new licensees, and the government will benefit because they'll get more money. The people who don't want to invest will walk away with, they can invest the balance of the money in something else.
Right. Rajeev, thank you so much for joining us on NDTV Profit, a very interesting debate, but we completely ran out of time. Thanks so much for joining us and sharing your views on the entire telecom sector with us.